The Russian Navy, tr.Voyenno-morskoy Flot Rossiyskoy Federatsii, lit.Military-Maritime Fleet of the Russian Federation, is the naval arm of the Russian Armed Forces. The present Russian Navy was formed in January 1992, succeeding the Navy of the Commonwealth of Independent States, which had itself succeeded the Soviet Navy following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. The regular Russian Navy was established by Peter the Great in October 1696. Ascribed to Peter I is the oft-quoted statement, "A ruler that has but an army has one hand, but he who has a navy has both." The symbols of the Russian Navy, the St. Andreas flag and ensign, and most of its traditions were established personally by Peter I. Neither Jane's fighting ships nor the International Institute for Strategic Studies list any standard ship prefixes for the vessels of the Russian Navy. For official U.S. Navy photographs, they are sometimes referred to as RFS, Russian Federation ship. However, the Russian Navy does not use this convention for itself. The Russian Navy possesses the vast majority of the former Soviet naval forces, and currently comprises the Northern Fleet, the Russian Pacific Fleet, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the Russian Baltic Fleet, the Russian Caspian Flotilla, naval aviation, and the coastal troops. A recently approved rearmament program has placed the development of the Navy on an equal footing with the strategic nuclear forces for the first time in Soviet and Russian history. The program, covering the period until 2015, is expected to see the replacement of 45% of the inventory of the Russian Navy. Out of 4.9 trillion rubles allocated for military rearmament, 25% will go into building new ships. We are already building practically as many ships as we did in Soviet times, First Deputy Prime Minister Sergei Ivanov said during a visit to Severodvinsk in July 2007. The problem now is not lack of money, but how to optimize production so that the Navy can get new ships 3, not 5, years after laying them down. The Russian Navy suffered severely since the dissolution of the Soviet Union due to insufficient maintenance, lack of funding and subsequent effects on the training of personnel and timely replacement of equipment. Another setback is attributed to Russia's domestic shipbuilding industry, which is reported to have been in decline as to the capabilities of constructing contemporary hardware efficiently. Some analysts even say that because of this, Russia's naval capabilities have been facing a slow but certain, irreversible collapse. Some analysts say that the recent rise in gas and oil prices has enabled a sort of renaissance of the Russian Navy due to increased available funds, which may allow Russia to begin developing the capacity to modernize. In August 2014, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that Russian naval capabilities would be bolstered with new weapons and equipment within the next 6 years in response to NATO deployments in Eastern Europe and recent developments in Ukraine. Origins. The origins of the Russian Navy may be traced to the period between the 4th and the 6th century. The first Slavic flotillas consisted of small sailing ships and rowboats, which had been seaworthy and able to navigate in riverbeds. During the 9th through 12th centuries, there were flotillas in the Kievan Rus consisting of hundreds of vessels with 1, 2, or 3 masts. The citizens of Novgorod known to have conducted military campaigns in the Baltic Sea, although contemporary Scandinavian sources state that the fleet was from Karelia or Estonia. Latya was a typical boat used by the army of Novgorod. There were also smaller sailboats and rowboats, such as ushkuis for sailing in rivers, lakes and skerries, kochas, and noseds, used for cargo transportation. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Cossacks conducted military campaigns against the Crimean Khanate and Ottoman Empire, using sailboats and rowboats. The Don Cossacks called them strugs. These boats were capable of transporting up to 80 men. The Cossack flotillas numbered 80 to 100 boats. The centralized Russian state had been fighting for its own access to the Baltic Sea, Black Sea and Sea of Azov since the 17th century. By the end of that century, the Russians had accumulated some valuable experience in using riverboats together with land forces. Under Tsar Mikhail Fyodorovich, the construction of the first three-masted ship to be built entirely within Russia was finished in 1636. She was built in Balagna by Danish shipbuilders from Holstein with a European design. She was christened the Frederick. In 1667–69, the Russians tried to build naval ships in a village of Dudanovo on the shores of the Oka River for the purpose of defending the trade routes along the Volga River, which led to the Caspian Sea. In 1668, they built a 26-gun ship, the Oryol, a yacht, a boat with a mast and bowsprit, and a few rowboats. During much of the 17th century, Russian merchants and Cossacks, using Kochboats, sailed across the White Sea, exploring the rivers Lena, Kolyma and Indigirka, and founding settlements in the region of the Upper Amur. Unquestionably the most celebrated Russian explorer was Semyon Dezhnev, who, in 1648, sailed the entire length of present-day Russia along the Arctic coast. Rounding the Chukotka Peninsula, Dezhnev passed through the Bering Sea and sailed into the Pacific Ocean. Imperial Russian Navy. The regular Russian Navy was created at the initiative of Peter the Great. During the Second Azov campaign of 1696 against the Ottoman Empire, the Russians employed for the first time 2 warships, 4 fireships, 23 galleys and 1,300 strugs built on the Voronezh River. After the Azov fortress was taken, at Peter I's request, the Boyar Duma understood the vital importance of a navy for successful warfare and passed a decree on commencing the construction of a regular navy on the 20th of October 1696. This date is considered the official birthday of the regular Russian Navy. Early on in his reign, Peter made a tour to Western Europe, England, and Holland. In Holland, he became acquainted with the work of the mathematicians Hans Gouda, Dirk Raven, and Hans of Sprantzen-Hoogstraat, which sparked his enthusiasm for the value of mathematics. A major result of this tour was the hiring of large numbers of foreign specialists of various expertise, including mathematicians. Among those hired was Henry Farquharson, called in Russia Andrei Danilovich Farquharson, who had taught mathematics and astronomy at the University of Aberdeen and was recommended by Halley and Jacob Daniel Bruce, while John Coulson was hired to teach Bruce mathematics. Farquharson's task in Russia was to create and administer a school of mathematics and navigation. It was under Farquharson's guidance that he and Tsar Peter read the mathematics curriculum for the new school. He was accompanied by Stephen Gwynn and Richard Grice, who were graduates of the England's Royal Mathematical School. In 1700 at Voronezh, the first major ships launched for the fledgling Russian Navy, for use with the Azov fleet, were the 58-gun Go-To Predestinatsia, the 80-gun Staryi Orel, and the 70-gun Staryi Dub. During the Great Northern War of 1700 to 1721, the Russians built the Baltic Fleet and the city of St. Petersburg. In 1703 to 1723, the main base of the Baltic Fleet was located in St. Petersburg and then in Kronstadt. Other bases were later established in Vyborg, Helsingfors, Revel and Abo. At first, Vladimirsky Prikaz was in charge of shipbuilding. Later on, these functions were transferred to the Russian Admiralty. Basic principles of the Russian Navy, its educational and training methods, as well as methods for conducting military action, were all summarized in the naval regulations. Peter the Great, Fyodor Apraksin, Alexei Senyavin, Norm Senyavin and Mikhail Golitsyn are generally credited for the development of the Russian art of naval warfare. Main principles of naval warfare were further developed by Grigory Spiridov, Fyodor Ushakov, and Dmitry Senyavin. The Russo-Turkish Wars of Catherine the Great resulted in the establishment of the Black Sea Fleet with its bases in Sevastopol and Kherson. It was at the time that Russian warships started to venture into the Mediterranean on a regular basis. In 1770, Grigory Spiridov's squadron gained supremacy in the Aegean Sea by destroying the Turkish fleet in the Battle of Chesma. After having advanced to the Danube, the Russians formed the Danube military flotilla for the purpose of guarding the Danube estuary from the Turks, and they came in 1771 as guests to Dubrovnik in the Republic of Ragusa. The beluga caviar from the Danube was famous, and the merchants from the Republic of Ragusa dominated the import-export business in Serbia with the Habsburg monarchy. The Russian Navy captured in 1782 British cargo vessels. Their cargo were hemp and iron. The Republic of Ragusa became one of the chief carriers of the Mediterranean in 1783 with the help of the USA. When Britain acknowledges the United States' independence, although the Americans agreed to allow Dubrovnik's ships free passage in the ports. During the Mediterranean expedition of 1799, Fyodor Ushakov single-handedly carved out the Greek Republic of 7 islands, proceeding to clear from the French Corfu and all the Ionian Islands. His squadron then blocked the French bases in Italy, notably Genoa and Ancona, and successfully assaulted Naples and Rome. Ushakov, proclaimed a patron saint of the Russian Navy in the 21st century, was succeeded in command by Dmitry Senyavin, who reasserted Russian control of the southern Adriatic, disrupted Dubrovnik's sea trade, and destroyed the Ottoman fleet in the Battle of Athos. Between 1803 and 1855, Russian sailors undertook over 40 circumnavigations and distant voyages, which played an important role in exploration of the Far East and culminated in Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen's discovery of Antarctica. Notwithstanding these triumphs, Russia's slow technical and economic development in the first half of the 19th century caused her to fall behind other world powers in the field of steamboat construction. It was in 1826 that the Russians built the first armed steamboat Ijora. At the outbreak of the Crimean War in 1853, steamships were few and sailing ships heavily predominated. The Battle of Sinope, won by Pavel Nakhimov, is remembered in history as the last significant naval battle involving sailing ships. During the Siege of Sevastopol in 1854 to 1855, Russian sailors set an example of using all means possible for defending the base from land and sea. Although the Russians introduced modern naval mining in the Baltic and repelled the siege of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky in the Pacific, Sevastopol was finally surrendered on honorable terms, but only after the Russians sank the ships to prevent outside use of the harbor. In accordance with the Treaty of Paris, Russia lost its right to have a military fleet in the Black Sea. As a consequence, the Russian sailing fleet lost its significance and was rapidly replaced by steamboats, including the first steel-armored gunship Opet and one of the first seafaring ironclads Pyotr Veliki. On 16 January 1877, Admiral Stepan Makarov became the first to launch torpedoes from a boat in combat. He also proposed the idea and oversaw the construction of the world's first ocean-going icebreaker, Yermak, commanding it in 2 Arctic expeditions in 1899 and 1901. At about the same time, Alexei Krylov elaborated the modern floodability theory. The Russian Navy was considered the 3rd strongest in the world on the eve of the Russo-Japanese War, which turned to be a catastrophe for the Russian military in general and the Russian Navy in particular. Although neither party lacked courage, the Russians were defeated by the Japanese in the Battle of Port Arthur, which was the first time in warfare that mines were used for offensive purposes. The warships of the Baltic Fleet sent to the Far East were lost in the Battle of Tsushima. Soon after the war, Russia devoted a significant portion of its military spending to an ambitious shipbuilding program aimed at replacing lost warships with modern dreadnoughts. During World War I, the fleets played a limited role in the Eastern Front, due to heavy defensive and offensive mining on both sides. Characteristically, the Black Sea Fleet succeeded in mining the Bosphorus, thus preventing the Ottoman fleet from entering the Black Sea. After the revolution forced Russia to quit the war, the Baltic Fleet was evacuated from Helsinki and Tallinn to Kronstadt during the ice cruise of the Baltic Fleet, and many of the ships of the Black Sea Fleet found their last refuge in Bizatek. Soviet Navy. For the most part, Russian sailors welcomed the Russian Revolution of 1917, in which they participated. Earlier, in 1905, sailors of the Imperial Russian battleship Potemkin in the Black Sea Navy revolted. In 1906, rebellious soldiers gained control of some Helsinki coastal fortifications during events known as the Viipuri Rebellion, which was subsequently put down, following bombardments from ships of the Baltic Fleet which remained loyal to the Tsarist government. The first ship of the Soviet Navy could be considered to be the rebellious Imperial Russian cruiser Avrora, whose blank shot from its forecastle gun signaled the October Revolution according to Soviet narratives. In March 1921, the sailors of Kronstadt rebelled against the Bolsheviks, demanding freedom of speech and closing of concentration camps. But this belated revolt was ruthlessly suppressed by Leon Trotsky. After the revolution, the Navy's restoration was slow, and only with the beginning of industrialization in 1930 was a large shipbuilding program developed, but not accomplished before the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, the Soviet Union's portion of World War II. As a result, the Soviet Navy during World War II consisted of some old World War I-era ships, some modern pre-war built cruisers and destroyers, and a number of torpedo boats. Unfortunately, much of the Soviet fleet on the Baltic Sea was blocked in Leningrad and Kronstadt by Finnish and German minefields during 1941 to 1944 and maimed by mines and air attacks. Nevertheless, numerous sorties by attack boats and submarines actions were conducted on the Black Sea, with the loss of the main naval base, Sevastopol, and effective actions of Axis aviation as well as minefields. The effectiveness of large surface ships was limited. The Northern Fleet, composed mostly of destroyers, played a role in anti-aircraft and anti-submarine defense of Allied convoys heading to Murmansk. During the Cold War, the Soviets gave the Navy a number of missions in addition to its role as one of the legs of the nuclear triad. The Navy was supposed to destroy American SSBNs and carrier groups, interdict NATO lines of communications, and assist the ground forces in continental theater offensives. They were quick to equip the surface fleet with missiles of various sorts. In fact, it became a hallmark of Soviet design to place large anti-ship missiles onto relatively small and fast missile boats. The Soviet Navy also possessed several very large guided missile cruisers with great firepower, such as those of the Kirov class and the Slava class cruisers. In the 1980s, the Soviet Navy acquired its first true aircraft carrier, Tbilisi. In some respects, including speed and reactor technology, later Soviet submarines were, and remain, some of the world's best. The primary shortcomings were insufficient noise damping and sonar technology. The Soviets possess numerous purpose-built guided missile submarines, such as the Oscar-class submarine, as well as many ballistic missile submarines, such as the Delta-class submarines, and attack submarines, such as the Victor and Akula-class submarines. The Soviet Navy's Typhoon-class ballistic missile boats are the world's largest submarines. The Soviet attack submarine force was, like the rest of the Navy, geared towards the interception of NATO convoys, but also targeted American aircraft carrier battle groups. Modern Russian Navy. The 1991 dissolution of the Soviet Union led to a severe decline in the Russian Navy. Defense expenditures were severely reduced. Many ships were scrapped to laid up as accommodation ships at naval bases, and a building program was essentially stopped. Sergei Gorshkov's build-up during the Soviet period had emphasized ships over support facilities, but Gorshkov had also retained ships in service beyond their effective lifetimes, so a reduction had been inevitable in any event. The situation was exacerbated by the impractical range of vessel types which the Soviet military-industrial complex, with the support of the leadership, had forced on the Navy, taking modifications into account. The Soviet Navy in the mid-1980s had nearly 250 different classes of ship. The Kiev-class aircraft carrying cruisers and many other ships were prematurely retired, and the incomplete second Admiral Kuznetsov-class aircraft carrier Varyag was eventually sold to the People's Republic of China by Ukraine. Funds were only allocated for the completion of ships ordered prior to the collapse of the USSR, as well as for refits and repairs on fleet ships taken out of service since. However, the construction times for these ships tended to stretch out extensively. In 2003, it was reported that the Akula-class submarine Nerpa had been under construction for 15 years. Storage of decommissioned nuclear submarines in ports near Murmansk became a significant issue, with the Bellona Foundation reporting details of lowered readiness. Naval support bases outside Russia, such as Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam, were gradually closed, with the exception of the modest technical support base in Tartus, Syria, to support ships deployed to the Mediterranean. Naval aviation declined as well from its height as Soviet naval aviation, dropping from an estimated 60,000 personnel with some 1,100 combat aircraft in 1992 to 35,000 personnel with around 270 combat aircraft in 2006. In 2002, out of 584 naval aviation crews, only 156 were combat-ready, and 77 ready for night flying. Average annual flying time was 21.7 hours, compared to 24 hours in 1999. Training and readiness also suffered severely. In 1995, only 2 missile submarines at a time were being maintained on station from the Northern and Pacific fleets. The decline culminated in the loss of the Oscar II-class Kursk submarine during the Northern Fleet summer exercise that was intended to back up the publication of a new naval doctrine. The exercise was to have culminated with the deployment of the Admiral Kuznetsov task group to the Mediterranean. As of February 2008, the Russian Navy had 44 nuclear submarines with 24 operational, 19 diesel-electric submarines, 16 operational, and 56 first and second-rank surface combatants, 37 operational. Despite this improvement, the November 2008 accident on board the Akula-class submarine attack boat NERPA during sea trials before lease to India represented a concern for the future. In 2009, Admiral Popov, a former commander of the Russian Northern Fleet, said that the Russian Navy would greatly decline in combat capabilities by 2015 if the current rate of new ship construction remained unchanged, due to the retirement of ocean-going ships. In 2012, President Vladimir Putin announced a plan to build 51 modern ships and 24 submarines by 2020. Of the 24 submarines, 16 will be nuclear-powered. On 10 January 2013, the Russian Navy finally accepted its first new Borei-class SSBN for service. A second Borei was undergoing sea trials and entered service on 21 December 2013. A third Borei-class boat was launched and began trials in early 2013, and was commissioned in late 2014. Leadership 1991-1992 FADM Chernavan Vladimir Nikolaevich, 1992 November 1997 FADM Gromov Felix Nikolaevich, November 1997 September 2005 FADM Kuroidov Vladimir Ivanovich, September 2005 September 2007 FADM Masurin Vladimir Vasilyevich, September 2007 May 2012 ADM Vysotsky Vladimir Sergeyevich, May 2012 April 2016 ADM Cherkov Viktor Viktorovich, April 2016 Present ADM Korolev Vladimir Ivanovich. Structure. Since 2012 the headquarters of the Russian Navy is once again located in the Admiralty in St. Petersburg. Russian naval manpower is a mixture of conscripts serving one-year terms and volunteers. In 2006 the IISS assessed there were 142,000 personnel in the Russian Navy. As of 2008 the conscription term was reduced to 1 year and a major downsizing and reorganization were underway. In 2008 plans were announced to move the headquarters to the Admiralty building in St. Petersburg, the historic location of the headquarters of the Imperial Russian Navy. The Navy staff finally relocated there in November 2012. Naval Infantry. The Russian Naval Infantry are the amphibious force of the Russian Navy and can trace their origins back to 1705, when Peter I issued a decree for an infantry regiment of naval equipage. Since its formation it has seen action in the Napoleonic Wars, the Crimean War, the Russo-Japanese War, the First and Second World Wars, and the Chechen and Georgian conflicts. Under the leadership of Admiral Gorshkov during the Cold War, the Soviet Navy expanded the reach of the naval infantry and deployed it worldwide on numerous occasions. But since the dissolution of the Soviet Union its role has been greatly reduced. The naval infantry and coastal troops are led by the Deputy Commander for Naval Infantry, Commandant of the Naval Infantry of the Russian Navy, Major General Alexander Kolpatsenko. The motto, "Where we are, there is victory." Naval aviation. The first naval aviation units in Russia were formed in 1912 to 1914 as a part of the Soviet Baltic Fleet and the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. Since its formation, it has participated in the Russian Civil War, World War II and in many other conflicts throughout Europe. the Middle East and Asia. During the Cold War, the naval aviation pursued a policy of deploying large numbers of bombers in maritime strike roles to counter the U.S. Navy's extensive fleet of aircraft carriers. By 1989, it operated over 1,000 fixed-wing aircraft, with the majority being bombers such as the Tu-22M Backfire and the Tu-16 Badger. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, however, it has been significantly reduced in size. As of 2007, the Russian naval aviation consists of the following components: naval missile-carrying aviation, shore-based ASW aviation, attack aviation, shore-based fighter aviation, reconnaissance aviation, shipborne aviation, auxiliary air units, equipment.